You're watching CGTV, Community Government Television, Channel 11, Pitkin County, City of Aspen, and Town of Snowmass Village.
The City of Aspen, established in 1881, has over 220 full-time employees, a number that swells to more than 425 with the addition of seasonal and temporary workers. Organized into more than 20 departments, the City of Aspen provides major amenities like parks, a rec center, and open space, and services like utilities and police and Kids First to its residents and visitors. From the golf course to the Community Development Department, the Wheeler Opera House to the Parking Department, the City of Aspen and its employees strive to do the best job possible. A major goal of the city is keeping open communication between the government and the citizens. Welcome to City Matters, a show where the city does matter, and matters of the city are brought to you. Hello and welcome to City Matters. I'm Mitzi Rapkin, Director of Community Relations for the City of Aspen, and on this show we talk about all things city, and I am so honored to be joined today by Ian Gray, our City Forester. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
I'm so excited to talk about our forest. Who doesn't love trees?
I love them, and I love talking about them, so yeah, I'm very happy to be here.
So how did you get into forestry?
Good question. I wouldn't call it a second act, but it's because I have been doing forestry of one shape or form or another for the last 20 years, but it's got nothing to do with what I did for my undergraduate degree, which was political science and French. But I guess I would trace it back to my dad. He is a civil engineer, and he used to do research in the Pacific Northwest in deforested watersheds about slope stability and how it affects watersheds. So from a very early age, out camping in the forests or in clear cuts, seeing what happens when we don't care for our trees. So that's where it all started. I've been in the valley since 2007, working for a tree service and splitting my time in the winter going to work for SKICO. So, yeah.
Now you're full-time with the trees.
Full-time with the trees, yeah.
So you haven't been with the City of Aspen too long.
Mm-hmm.
What strikes you about Aspen's urban forest?
You know, it took a year out when I first decided to move from the private sector into the public sector and trying to find a way to become an urban forester. I was out in California a year, and coming back, it really struck me what a wonderful urban forest we do have here. The stature and size of the trees, the amount of tree coverage, or canopy cover as we call it, that we have. And it's a pretty remarkable and healthy urban forest, and yeah, it's obviously people care about it, and it's well looked after. So it's something that really stands out, and I'm sure it does for any out-of-town people that come in as tourists to visit. You know, tree-lined streets everywhere you look, straight up into the mountain, and then the gondola pops out and takes you up the ski hill. So it's a pretty remarkable place.
It is amazing, too, once you get up high, whether you're riding the gondola or if you're up on Smuggler, when you look down, this is a treed city.
Absolutely. We have, at last count, 30% canopy coverage, and that's done with, aerial images. They take a picture, and they can tell how much hardscape they can see compared to how much tree canopy is covering it. So that is, on average, most American cities might have 5 to 10%. So we're doing really well at 30%.
And I think we have 10,000 trees.
We do. Yep. And we've added some more recently because we finally started counting the trees on the golf course, which is obviously a City of Aspen property. And we're constantly adding. If you look back to, before the 80s, before we really got going with the Parks Department, and then the 90s with an actual tree program, our urban forest was in kind of a state of decline. We had maybe 3,000 or 4,000 trees. We had thousands of plantable or vacant planting spots on city parks, city streets, and that's changed dramatically. Now we're up to 10,000 trees, and I think at last count we barely had 150 plantable spots. That's what they would call full stocking levels in forestry terms. So we're doing well.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what are some interesting facts about our trees? Like, one interesting fact that I learned recently was that the miners planted trees in a grid in Aspen, which I didn't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, early days when they did start doing some, planning and zoning, as one would call it these days, and laid the city out in grid blocks, typically what they would have is those ditches that you'll still see in certain places in the West End that are still open. Those would crisscross the entire town. Essentially, it was creeks, streams, runoff, snowmelt coming off of the mountain, gurgling out of, exit shafts on mines, that sort of thing. They would convey those across town in a grid shape. So that is where it originated from.
To water the trees.
Well, just to get the water away from town, but also to water trees. And they did plant trees along those ditches, and they thrived. And you can still see some of our biggest cottonwoods in those grids on the edge of city blocks and the right-of-way throughout the West End, all over town. So,
any other interesting facts about our trees?
Interesting facts about our trees. Yeah, I mean, those big cottonwoods I was talking about, those typically live anywhere between 80 and 110 years. That's a typical lifespan. The oldest trees that live in Colorado are probably the blue spruce. Those can live up to 200 years. I don't think we've got any spruce trees that old in our city inventory. The tallest trees in City of Aspen's inventory are probably some of the cottonwoods and some of the spruce that are going to be topping out at about 80 feet, 85 feet. I do know there are some spruce trees just outside of town. For example, up the Castle Creek drainage that come right off the riverbed. Those are 100 feet plus. And if I'm not mistaken, in the Colorado Tree Coalition that keeps data on biggest trees across the state of all species, we do have a cottonwood off of the Mail Trail at the edge of Aces there, which I think is number 3 or 4 size cottonwood, and that's based on girth, the size of the tree trunk, canopy spread, how wide it is, and canopy height. So yeah, we do have some specimen trees. And of course the Sardi House trees. I mean, who can miss those at Christmas when they're all lit up? So,
yeah. You mentioned that we have a tree inventory, which is kind of staggering to imagine when you think we have 10,000 trees and you've taken data on all of them.
Yeah, so they started doing inventories back in the 90s. Now we've got a really nice system. It's all digital. We first contracted with this new outfit, Planet Geo, and our system's called Tree Plotter. And anybody can go look at it. If you go to the city website and drop down through the Forestry and Natural Resources, you can find it in there. And you can look at trees, individual streets, because there's colored dots, different species, superimposed on a Google Earth image, and you can literally see what city trees are in front of your house or wherever you want to look. So that's the basis on that's a tool that we use as a basis for managing our trees. So whenever a tree gets work done on it, there's a work order created, the crews go out and work on it, I check the work and then update it in the system. So we've got this rolling inventory that we use as a tool because we can also flag trees if we think there's a defect or a hazard, so we can manage the risk appropriately. It's one of the sort of central pieces of any good sort of tree management plan for a city, to have an up-to-date inventory. It's really the starting point for managing your urban forest.
And so those trees are trees in city land.
City right-of-way, so that would be streets, city parks, urban wildland interface, some of our open space. There's some city trees on the edge of that. But yeah, it's basically city property or where there's a city easement. So.
Right. So it's nice to think, while the city has 10,000 trees, the city of Aspen itself has more because there's trees on private property all over the place.
Absolutely, and thank you for bringing that up. It's something that I try and remind people all the time that when we talk about our community forest, our urban forest, that's just not the stuff that the city manages or takes care of. That includes all the trees on private property. Now, we don't manage trees on private property per se, but we do have a very strong tree ordinance. which is great. Not a lot of cities have that. It makes sometimes a lot more work for me because Aspen being Aspen and people have valuable property that they want to develop. But part of my mandate through City Council is tree preservation, and it's actually spelled out that way in the municipal code. So I get to have a say on, or the Parks Department does, on what trees we try and preserve if they're worth preserving when a parcel comes under redevelopment. Sometimes it can be a little contentious, but we have that conversation with the property owners and the developers and find a way to accommodate both.
So what is the diversity of our forest? I mean, a lot of people might just think right away, okay, pines, firs, aspens.
Yeah.
Oaks.
And this is something that's been identified in previous management plans, and it's something that we're continuing to work on. We do have a preponderance of aspens, cottonwoods, and spruce. Those trees make up, probably 60 to 70% of our urban forest. And the risk there is that if you have something like Dutch elm disease or emerald ash borer, which goes after one species of tree, and you have too many of those trees in your urban forest, it can wipe out a big percentage of your urban forest in one go. So we try and avoid, that's what we would call a monoculture, too many of one type of tree. We try and have no more than 10% of one species. So I say this is a work in progress because we identified this as a problem, or previous foresters did a long time ago. So we're gradually trying to introduce different species into the, into what we call our planting palette when we're replacing trees. Things like hawthorns, some of which are native, hackberries, new cultivars of elms. The nurserymen are always coming up with different stuff, and there may be new opportunities because our climate is changing a bit. It's not quite as cold as it used to be all the time, so it actually gives us an opportunity to perhaps experiment with some new tree varieties.
So you just mentioned when we were talking the management plan, we've just now come out with a brand new forestry management plan. What is that plan? What's its mission?
Sure. Yeah, that was one of my big tasks that I've been working on for the last year since I've been with the city. And the Community Forest Management Plan is kind of a guiding document, but it speaks to the core forestry operations that we undertake to maintain and preserve the community forest. You've got the things that happen every year, like pruning, removals, planting. Another core piece of this is we've adopted a new risk management program according to industry best practice. Some of those big cottonwoods that we love in the West End, for example, they're getting old. They're approaching the end of their life. So they do come with extra risk. So as part of that risk plan, we get eyes on those trees every year. We've got some wonderful diagnostic tools. We've got this thing called a sonic tomograph, which sends like a sonar ping through the tree, and it creates a 3D image, a horizontal slice, if you like, of any decay pockets on the inside of the tree. So that can give us an idea of what's going on inside the tree and give us an idea when it's going to be the time to say, okay, we've tried to keep this tree going as long as we possibly can, because those bigger trees give us so much more than the smaller trees. So it's an important piece of the canopy. Yeah. Some other fun stuff with the Urban Forest Management Plan that doesn't necessarily happen every year. We will do another LiDAR study. That's a low-angle radar study. That gives us that canopy cover percentage. So we try and update that every 10 years. No, every 5 years for the LiDAR. I'm going to try and get the Rocky Mountain chapter of the International Society of Arboriculture, which is kind of one of our parent statutory bodies, to bring the Rocky Mountain climbing championship. So literally all the tree climbers from the state and the neighboring states come, and we have a competition to see how fast people can climb trees. So that's I've got this implementation matrix of some of the things that occur once in a while, but you can see it all on one page over 10 years, all the activities that are going to happen. So
That's fun.
that'll be coming to you soon, hopefully.
So I was looking through the final draft and some of the goals of the plan. We've talked about diversity is one of them,
Yep.
maintaining canopy cover, inventory monitoring, meeting and exceeding Arbor Day Foundation requirements.
Yep.
So we are a Tree City, USA.
We are Tree City, USA, so that's part of the Arbor Day Foundation. They have some minimal requirements. You have to spend a certain amount of your budget on, specifically on a dedicated forestry program. You have to have a professional arborist like myself heading up the program. You have to have a tree ordinance, and you have to celebrate that every year. As part of the renewal for those for that program, we show them how many trees we plant every year. We give them data on how many trees we pruned and removed. Hopefully you're planting more than you removed. And at the Arbor Day Foundation, we go through this whole process where we read out the proclamation. Typically we have a representative from Colorado State Forest Service, and they actually did our inventory for us. We contracted for them to come and do our new inventory. They'll typically read out the proclamation. We read it out in City Council. We give away a lot of trees. Bucket truck rides for the kids. It's always really popular. So
Yeah. One of the things I was reading that I thought was really interesting was maybe because so many of the trees were planted when the miners were here or a little bit after, we do have a bulk of trees that are sort of aging out. So
Yeah.
how do you deal with that?
Well, like I say, we try and keep them as long as we can to sort of stage the removals, because that would be pretty stark if you had to remove 40 or 50 big cottonwoods all in one shot. But they decay at different rates, so that's what those diagnostic tools are for. But the key thing for all that is getting trees planted back as quickly as possible. What you want to end up with is a bell curve of sort of medium and young age trees at the top of the curve, the most numerous in your tree population, and those big trees making up the smaller numbers. The trick is, as we discussed, those big trees give more benefits. So when you have to take them down, it is a big loss.
Like more oxygen?
Yeah, all sorts of stuff. And we can quantify things like this quite easily now. We can actually measure this. And this is one of my big goals with the management plan and reaching out to people in the community to let them know that these trees do a lot for us. Air purification, whether it's filtering out particulates from like diesel emissions, that sort of thing. Oxygen, plain and simple. Carbon sequestration, because that gets bound up in the wood of the tree. It also keeps excess storm water out of our rivers, because the trees absorb it in their root systems. And the bigger the tree, the more sort of work that does. There's a lot of other sort of aesthetic benefits or health benefits that we might not think about. They've got really good statistics and studies that show that if somebody's looking out of a hospital room onto a wooded lot of trees, their recovery times are faster. It has a calming effect on people emotionally and psychologically when they're walking through the woods. We've heard people talk about what they call forest bathing, just hanging out in the woods. It makes you feel better.
Yeah.
And I can concur. You probably can as well.
Oh, yeah.
That's why we like getting outside around here. It does all sorts of other things. It improves real estate value. It makes people linger and shop longer if they're in an arcade with lots of trees in it in front of the shops. All sorts of things like that. Reduces crime. You'd think, some people think that, well, too many trees, the criminals are hiding behind the trees, but it actually reduces the impulse for people to be violent or aggressive. So it's, they're amazing things. They really are. So
I just had this vision that every time you have a birthday, someone must give you a book about trees. Does that happen?
I do like collecting books about trees, and here's a funny one for you. When I first started getting into forestry way back when I had a student summer job when I was in high school up in Canada, and I was a tree planter. High volume commercial reforestation, some people jokingly refer to it as planting crops, but I'm proud to say that in the course of my 5 summers of planting trees up there, I planted over 250,000 trees by hand myself. I mean, we're talking little seedlings like this, but it's a lot of trees. And I remembered after the first couple of seasons that one of my favorite books growing up as a kid was Dr. Seuss's The Lorax. So I've got one tattoo, and the one tattoo I got is of the Lorax.
Oh,
And I've had this on my shoulder since 1988. It's a little bit faded now, but he's still there. So that's the great thing about my job now. I actually get paid to speak for the trees as the city forester. So
yeah, that's wonderful.
It all makes sense.
Yeah. So does the community plan lay out any sort of future vision for the forest?
Yes, in as much as what I'm really trying to communicate to people is this whole notion of the benefits of trees. We call them ecosystem benefits, all that data that I was talking about, the things that they do for us. You know, a lot of people have a easy time understanding what we call gray infrastructure, pipes, roads, street lamps, electrical circuits, that sort of thing. But one of the popular terms these days in forestry is what we call green infrastructure. And if you think about it, green infrastructure, certainly in terms of trees, is one of the few things that actually appreciates in value as the tree grows. The older it gets, the more value it gets, the bigger it gets, the more it does. Whereas gray infrastructure depreciates almost immediately. So we use this a lot in Aspen. Aspen's really been progressive because you'll see things like curbside bump outs where they have these little rain gardens. That helps process storm water, filters it, cleans it, and absorbs it before it runs off into the river. The whole project down in the Rio Grande with those pour-overs and the reeds and the wetlands down there, that helps filter the water, take the sediment out. Projects like that. So we're trying to communicate to people that they absolutely need to think about trees as part of that green infrastructure. It's essential, and it will become even more important with climate change, as things get warmer. There's a recent study in California that from 50 mid to large size cities where they tried to estimate the value of cooling from a tree, and this is over like 50 million trees in urban settings that were in the study. They reckon on average size tree probably contributes $11 of cooling benefit per year. So you multiply that across 50 million, that's a lot of cooling. So, if our temperatures are going up, trees definitely help a lot, just with that one small piece, let alone all the other bits of data that we talked about. So.
Are there you mentioned with climate change that there's the opportunity, sadly, to plant, different kinds of trees, but are there other threats with climate change to our urban forests that are in the forefront of your mind?
Well, ever present are invasive insects. A lot of the insects that we've had trouble with recently, like mountain pine beetle, they're actually indigenous, but it's because of those higher temperatures and reduced rainfall that they have a population explosion, which makes it problematic. With expanding global trade, we do see these exotic insects that come through, and that's essentially what emerald ash borer is. That came in on shipping pallets to Detroit back in 2006. But with the trade volumes and less money to inspect cargoes as they come in, that's even more of a threat. When I was out in California, I dealt with a new insect out there, the shot-hole borer, that was starting to become a problem, and that came in on wooden pallets as well. So that's something that I built into the management plans, is having preparedness plans for storm events, for exotic insects, or heat waves, wildfire, that sort of thing. So that's something that's going to be a feature of the new urban forest management plan.
So you mentioned if you were going to do these tree climbing competitions, do you choose a location where there's a bunch of tall trees and people do the tall trees at the same time, or are you timing people on individual trees?
It's a bit of both. Different trees for different types of work. You're sort of trying to mimic what a production arborist would do at work. So we've got to literally have a production or a work climb where he has to hit different stations on the tree, ring a bell, throw a stick into a hula hoop down on the ground. We've got a speed climb where they just have to get up to the top of a tree and down as fast as possible. There's other rope techniques. There's a foot locking competition. It's a particular way to climb a rope to get up the tree. We also have a throw ball competition. We use these little bean bags on a string to throw the beanbag over a branch, and the little string then pulls the climbing rope up behind it. So we got a competition to see who's most accurate throwing the ball into the tree.
That sounds fun.
So there's all sorts of stuff. Yeah, it's a good time.
One of the things that surprised me when I was reading through the forestry management plan was, I think it was maybe in the 80s, that people thought topping trees was good. Maybe it was earlier.
Yeah, it's that's always been a challenge, and that was something that was quickly built into our ordinances. It's very destructive for trees. Typically, the response, if you think about it, all of a sudden the tree loses all of its leaf coverage. What do leaves do? They produce energy and food for the tree. So the tree panics and sends out these fast-growing shoots called epicormic shoots. And they grow so quickly because they have to get some leaves out to start producing food for the tree again. They're very weakly attached. The normal course of events when say a tree sends out a branch, it's a fascinating sort of mechanical structure of overlapping rings of bark that make the branch so strong. But those epicormic shoots are really weakly attached. But they will get big eventually. So you end up with a topping cut, a fast-growing shoot that's poorly attached. The topping cut tends to rot down, and then the epicormic shoot becomes a branch, but it doesn't have the strength of attachment. So you're basically creating a decay pocket and a failure point. You know,
So no tree topping.
no tree topping. Bad idea.
All right. Well, if viewers are watching this before October 10th and 17th, we're having open houses
Yes.
to talk about the forestry management plan. They're
Yep.
from 3:30 to 7:30. On the 10th, it's in Connor Park, which is next to City Hall, and on the 17th, it's in Sister Cities.
Yep.
But if you're watching this after, you can always read online
Yep.
the tree
Absolutely.
management.
And if you have any tree questions, I'm always out and about doing site visits. If you have concerns about your trees or have questions, do call us. We'll come and visit and talk more trees. So,
Yeah. It's all on our website, cityofaspen.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mitzi. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for
Pleasure.
watching.
You're watching CGTV, Community Government Television, Channel 11, Pitkin County, City of Aspen, and Town of Snowmass Village.
The City of Aspen, established in 1881, has over 220 full-time employees, a number that swells to more than 425 with the addition of seasonal and temporary workers. Organized into more than 20 departments, the City of Aspen provides major amenities like parks, a rec center, and open space, and services like utilities and police and Kids First to its residents and visitors. From the golf course to the Community Development Department, the Wheeler Opera House to the Parking Department, the City of Aspen and its employees strive to do the best job possible. A major goal of the city is keeping open communication between the government and the citizens. Welcome to City Matters, a show where the city does matter and matters of the city are brought to you.